The concept of renovictions is familiar to people in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, but it's a problem, some experts say, showing up more in Edmonton. For a look at this issue, we're joined by Laura Murphy. She's the research coordinator for the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab at the University of Alberta. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning.
So for those who may not be familiar, what is a renoviction?
It's really something that what we've come to know financialized owners particularly use as a strategy.
What's a financialized owner?
So an owner who isn't local, is an investor, and is focused on getting as much profit out of housing as possible.
Okay.
So a shift from housing as a right and is something that we all need to an investment vehicle.
And then what do they do when they do a renoviction? What is that?
Well, they employ a number of value-add repositioning strategies. So that just means ways of extracting maximum wealth out of housing. So with older buildings, sometimes that can be going down to bare bones, where there's cuts to maintenance and rents are raised to squeeze as much as you can out of an older building. Sometimes also this is done through gentrification by upgrading. So investing in luxury upgrades and renovations to get the maximum amount of profit, which is really harmful to tenants. In Edmonton, as of the last census, over 68,000 households are dealing with housing that's unacceptable. And of that 68,000, 60,000 households are living in housing they can't afford. So for just affordability challenges only, around 53,000 households were dealing with this, and on average, incomes were around $35,000, which, for context, the same year, one-bedroom apartment, the average rental wage, meaning if you had an income to be able to afford an average cost of a one-bedroom apartment, was $41,000. So incomes haven't kept pace with increasing costs of housing. And the challenge, too, is investors really tend to hone in on markets that don't have any protections for renters, which we really have very limited tenant security protections in Alberta.
Right, you can raise rents once a year, I believe, and there's no real limit, right, on that?
Exactly.
On how much?
You can raise rents every 12 months. Tenants have to be given a 3-month notification, but there's no cap on what the rent increase can be. And for tenants who are reliant on housing subsidies, those are capped, but rental rates or increases are not.
Now, in a renoviction, you might have a walk-up somewhere in maybe the greater inner city of Edmonton that's in a nice neighborhood, but it's an older apartment, maybe it's 40 or 50 years old, and the landlord wants to upgrade it. Now, do they wait for somebody to move out, then they upgrade that, then charge more for that one, or there's actual people being moved out to make way for the renoviction?
Yeah, what's interesting is renovictions experienced all across Canada. So we hear a lot about what happens in Ontario and in Toronto especially, where landlords can only increase rent by so much per year. And they do use renoviction as one strategy to evict and then increase rent with new renters. In Alberta, because we don't have rental increases, it seems like a lot of tenants are in place while renovations are happening and then are hit with these huge increases at the end. So landlords don't have to push tenants out. They can increase rent as much as they want.
Yeah, I've recently seen on social media people putting forward, things about how much rents have been raised. I think I saw one in Calgary where, they were paying $1,400 and it went up to $2,400. I mean, $1,000 a month raise. It just seems incredible that that there's anybody out there who can afford to pay that. And I guess the landlord must think that they are, otherwise they wouldn't put that price up there.
What's interesting is we often hear quotes either from different orders of government or by financialized companies themselves, many of which are publicly traded and in their yearly reports around what the average rental income is, which is about a little over $70,000. But when you break that down by what tenants can and cannot afford, again, like over 53,000 households with an average income of $35,000 a year. There's a huge gap. Financialized firms, financialized owners, which, to take a step back, we estimate that around 51% of tenants right now in Edmonton live in secondary housing. So that's housing that's not purpose-built for rental. Of the remaining 49%, 48% live in housing that's owned by financialized owners. In 1986, that was virtually zero. Less than, I think, 0.2% of primary rental housing was owned by financialized firms, and it's gone up to 48%, and it's climbing. And it seems like we're in a tipping point. But yeah, what ends up happening with a lot of financialized firms, whether it be Boardwalk or Main Street, what they will do is they'll accept credit card from tenants. And some of the creep that happens with financialized owners trying to maximize profit is even non-financialized owners realize they can increase rent and generate more. So what ends up happening is, especially households that are living with low incomes, racialized households living with disabilities, they're pushed out, they're displaced, which is having a huge impact on just inequality within our city and representation in different neighborhoods. And people who've called different communities their home for many, many years are being pushed out. And not only that, are really finding it hard to find another place to live that's affordable.
How do you strike a balance, though, between landlords who see they need to absorb the rising costs of owning a property, because inflation is a real thing, and then tenants who need access to affordable housing?
I mean, the big challenge is in the 90s, we saw some policies that came into place that have had such huge impacts to now. The biggest thing is income is totally out of step with increases to housing costs, and this is not sustainable. So we never hear about credit card debt. We never hear about what tenants are having to do to survive, to stay in place. This is not sustainable, and we really do need regulations from government. We need to ensure that there is investment in housing, in our non-market housing especially. Alberta is notorious for having some of the lowest rates of subsidized housing across Canada, Edmonton as well. So we really do need to invest in non-market housing. We know that works. We need to ensure that housing is equivalent to income and that's sustainable. But we need both regulation as well as investment from all orders of government. And we need protections for renters. And we really need policies starting and beginning with the impacts and the realities that tenants face.
Laura, thanks for coming in to talk about it. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Laura Murphy is the research coordinator for the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab at the University of Alberta.